When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night. Hey there, believers. Got a great episode for you today. Today, I get to bring back Pete. I had Pete on, I think it was like around March or so. It was an episode that I titled Weird West Texas. And we agreed right off the bat that we needed to have a part two. My schedule, more than anything, kind of interfered with bringing him on any sooner. But he has since been on the Confessionals podcast. I don't know what all they discussed. I didn't get a chance to even listen to the show. I noticed that it was Weird West Texas on the Confessionals podcast as well. So that must have been a pretty good name if Tony had the same idea. So I'm going to bring Pete back on today. We're doing a part two. Super excited. I know we barely scratched the surface last time. So if you haven't heard that, we started kind of chronologically, and where Pete left off is where we're going to try to roughly pick back up today. So without further delay, let's just jump into this one. Did it ask for you to give the thumbs up yet?
I'm trying to find and see where it's at. It does have a little, do you know where it's at on the screen?
I thought it would be right in the middle of the screen, but
oh, okay, there it is. It's at the bottom.
Oh.
It is in the middle of the screen. Okay, there it is.
Sweet.
Got it. Okay, hi, Bo. It's good to hear from you again.
It's good to hear from you too, Pete. How you been, buddy?
Oh, I've been doing great. How have you been?
Doing good. Finally got some downtime.
All right, perfect. I guess we could pick up where we left off last time. I could tell you about mine and my family's Marfa Light experience.
Yes.
And it's kind of embarrassing, and you'll know why at the end. It's one of those things that we look back on it now and laugh, but at the time it wasn't funny. So back when my boys were little, my daughter was probably 11 or 12, around that age, and our boys were about 1 and 2. We decided to take them to the McDonald Observatory in Far West Texas. That's over in Fort Davis, Texas. And it's a University of Texas, one of those giant telescopes. We decided to go to a Star Watch party over there. And so it was just going to be a weekend day trip. And we got over there, and come to find out, you have to make reservations ahead of time. You can't just show up and buy tickets. And we'd driven all the way from Odessa. And it was a few hours drive to get there. that whole area is vast, and it's one of the darkest skies in America. That's why they put it there. It's one of those areas where you can see the Milky Way with the naked eye. But it turned out to be pretty cool. They were nice and sold us tickets anyway and let us in. So we took a tour of that telescope in the afternoon, and then we went and ate dinner, and then came back that night for the Star Watch party. And it was pretty cool. They got to see the moon and the craters up close. They had another telescope aimed at Orion's belt, and that just blew my mind. It's like the kind you see on TV or in magazines, where you see those purplish looking clouds in outer space.
Yes.
They named it something. I forgot what it's called, but anyway, that nebula or whatever that is, it's inside Orion's belt is where it was aimed at. It was cool. The trip was for the kids, but I think me and my wife enjoyed it a bit more than they did. That was pretty neat. And as we're leaving Fort Davis to head back to Odessa. When you come down off the mountain, you hit a T intersection. We were supposed to turn left and head north to go back to Odessa. But we saw a sign that said that Marfa was, if you turned right and went south, Marfa was only like 22 miles or something close. And I told my wife, I said, look how close Marfa is. And we'd never been there. And I said, you want to go over there and see if we can check out the Marfa lights? And she goes, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we turned right and headed over there towards Marfa. Now, a couple of related things I could tell you about Marfa is that on the Texas Bigfoot Conservancy website, it's got a lot. Have you heard of them?
I have.
Okay, well, they've got a lot of the sightings from Texas listed on that website. I had noticed one right there on that highway between Fort Davis and Marfa. There was one that took place back around 78, I believe, and the guy writing was from Midland. He said back in 78, him and a friend and his dad went to pick up a car in Marfa, Texas. They were bringing it back on a car hauler. And when they were headed northbound on that same highway, they'd spotted a Bigfoot on the side of the road. And the guy from Midland that wrote it said he wanted to go back and check it out, and his dad wouldn't let him. His dad started praying and told him just to keep going north. So he said it was creepy, but it really freaked his dad out. So we were now on that highway, except we were going south towards Marfa. So I told my wife that story, and I told her to keep her eyes peeled. And of course, we didn't see a Bigfoot. But the other thing that I could tell you about the Marfa lights is when I was a new officer back in the early 90s, we hired this one guy from Marfa, Texas. And he said that when they were in high school, him and his friends used to go out there at where the viewing center is for the Marfa lights. They would saddle up some horses and go out there in the dark. And he said they get just close enough where the people couldn't see them at nighttime. And then they would put these big flashlights over their shoulder. They'd flick them on and then ride away.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. To mess with people, right?
Yeah.
And so I told him, I said, so are you telling me that the Marfa lights they're fake? It was you guys doing that? And he goes, oh no. He goes, they're real. He said, but they don't always show up. He said, so we were just, he said it was Marfa. There was nothing to do. So he got bored and decided to go mess with people. And he goes, but no, he goes, the Marfa lights are real. And I said, well, what are they since you're from there? He goes, no one knows. And he said, and they don't always show up. I mean, it's a hit or miss thing.
Yeah.
And he said, but I'll tell you something else. He said, when he was right out of high school, he got hired by the sheriff's office in Alpine. And Alpine's the next town east of Marfa. And it's probably about 38 miles. It's relatively close. And he went to work for the sheriff's office there right out of high school. And they assigned him to be a dispatcher overnight. You know, nobody wants to work that graveyard shift.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a young deputy, single guy, that when the shift was over at 11 p.m., he said this deputy would come over there and just, he'd hang out with me and BS because I was the only one in the building. He said we would BS, and then he'd finally get tired at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and he would head home. And he said he went a couple of weeks without showing up. And when I finally saw him again, I asked him, hey, man, what happened? You don't come over here and visit with me anymore. He goes, man, let me tell you what happened. He looked around to see if anybody was listening. And he said, that last night I stayed here with you. He said, when I got on the highway that night, he said the highway was empty and I started headed home to Marfa. He said, and next thing you know, this ball of light comes up behind his vehicle. And then it came in the window and it came to rest down on the floorboard next to him. He said he was so scared. He didn't know what to do. He's driving. This ball of light is his passenger now down on the floorboard. And he said he was scared to death, kept driving to Marfa. And he said right outside of town, it just picked up and flew right back out the window. And he said after that, when his shift ended, there was Border Patrol agents, DPS troopers, that deputy from Alpine. All these guys lived over there in Marfa. And so when their shift would end at 11 p.m., they always formed a convoy and headed to Marfa from Alpine. Well, after that happened to him, he jumped in with the convoy. He didn't stick around, drive that trip alone.
I guess not. See,
Yeah.
I didn't really know the history of the Marfa lights. How long has this been going on?
That's been going on since the 1800s as far as recorded.
Wow.
So it's been going for a long time. And there was theories that said that it was headlights coming off a highway that's south of Marfa. But then they checked it against, they've conducted studies on it and stuff. And the lights from the highway don't line up with that viewing center where the lights are seen. And then back in the mid 1900s or sometime around there, the U.S. military conducted some tests out there. And what they did is they surrounded the area. And when there was some lights there, they decided to close in from every direction because try and find the source of these lights, see what they are. Well, they could only get within so many 100 feet of it, and then they just disappear. And other people have claimed that it's Native American spirits.
Right.
There's all kinds of theories as far as what it can be. And sometimes they dance around. Sometimes they're different colors. I've heard they're white, yellow, blue, and red. I've never actually seen those Marfa lights, but we had that story that the one I just told you. I told that story to my wife while we went to view these Marfa lights. Right.
Right.
So we pull into town, and once you get into town, you cut left on that highway that leads to Alpine, and then right there, as you're almost headed out, there's the viewing center. And they really put a lot of money into it now. It's become a real tourist thing. So they fixed that viewing center up pretty neat. We went over there. We got there. It was probably about 15 minutes till midnight. The boys had fallen asleep in their car seat. My daughter didn't want to get out and see the Marfa lights. So my wife and I got out. We were out there. We were looking around and stuff, and we did not see any Marfa lights whatsoever. We were kind of disappointed. We got in the vehicle. We had an SUV then. And I remember looking at the little clock on the vehicle. As soon as we got in, it was 12 o'clock midnight, right on the dot.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're pulling out onto the highway, and it's closer now to drive east towards Alpine than it is to go back the way we came. So we started headed east, and we had said, man, well, that was a waste of time. And we're like, yeah, it was. We hadn't been on the road a few minutes headed east, and I kid you not, there's this blue light behind us. I'm not kidding. And now, the reason I told you those other stories is so you would have in mind what I had in mind when I spot this.
Right.
And now it's behind us. And I couldn't really tell you how big it is, but if I was guessing, to me, it appeared to be somewhere between the size of a basketball and a beach ball. And it was like a bluish green orb, self-illuminating. And it appeared to be maybe 40 or 50 feet in the air behind us. And at some points I could see it and then I couldn't see it. And at first I didn't say anything to my wife because I thought, yeah, this is crazy. And I thought it's my imagination. And then I finally asked her to look back and see. I told her what I was seeing, see if she could see it. She looked back and sure enough, she saw it. And then at that point, I didn't know what this light was, but I'd started speeding up and didn't even realize it because I'm trying to get away from it, right?
Right.
And I couldn't lose that light. It was staying on us. Let's put it that way. And it would move around, but there it was. And at one point I was going so fast and I didn't even realize I was going this fast, Bo. She goes, babe, slow down. And I looked down, I was going 110 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
And I had a death grip on the wheel. And of course my heart was pounding and I didn't realize I'd accelerated that fast, but I was trying to lose that light. Well, anyway, I ended up slowing down, right? And the light, it ended up just like, I couldn't see it anymore. Like it disappeared. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we were scared. It definitely got my heart rate up. And it didn't come in the vehicle. It didn't do anything like that. And then I thought, well, maybe it was a light at the airport. But then again, here's the other thing too. I don't know if they even have an airport there. But yeah, the thing is, you'll know why I debated whether to even tell the story, because the light didn't even actually do anything to us. And it scared us so bad. We look back on it now and we'll laugh and it's funny. But at the time it was happening, it was not funny.
Yeah. I mean, I guess wouldn't be funny for it to be able to keep up with you or follow you going that speed. That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's still, to this day, we've never gone back to try and see the Marfa lights. That was enough for us. We got and we'd bargained for it. And if it was an Orbiter light, that's what we get for talking crap. We're saying, oh well, that was such a waste of time.
Well, what do you think that is, Pete? I mean, I know nobody knows for sure, but
yeah, I have no idea whatsoever. I think that those lights and orbs and stuff, I think they're related to everything else. The Bigfoot stuff, and a lot of times the lights are reported together. Then take into account all the weird stuff that people see on the side of the road, roadside crossings, and not just Bigfoot. I mean, other apparitions and things. I think they're somehow tied into the spirit world, is what I think. And I think it's paranormal, and pretty much I think it's negative, but I don't want to say that for sure because I don't know, but I lean that way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it is negative. There's a lot of that floating around right now anyway.
Yeah. I could tell you another something else related to Marfa, since we're on Marfa and it's Weird West Texas.
Sure.
The years later, when I was a watch commander on one of the shifts, I had this new rookie officer that came to work for us who was also from Marfa. And this would have been back in 2013 or 2014. And I would always ask my any of the officers, they knew I like to talk about, have you ever seen anything weird, or you ever seen Bigfoot? I would ask them all. Some guys would just roll their eyes and laugh it off. And some people would tell you some pretty spooky things that happened.
Oh, yeah.
And so based on that roadside crossing or sighting of Bigfoot from back in 78, I knew that there had been at least one sighting of Bigfoot in the area. So I asked that young rookie officer who was from Marfa if he'd ever seen a Bigfoot or heard anything about that. He said, no. He goes, we saw something once he said it was like a Bigfoot. He said, but this thing wasn't big. He said it was completely hair covered. He said, but it was smaller. somewhere between 2-3 feet tall, foot and a half. He wasn't sure because of the distance, but it was a short, hairy person covered in hair. And I said, really, where did this happen? He said, when they were in high school, that there was this place where all the high school kids would go party. And it was outside of Marfa, but I'm not sure in which direction. And he said it was about 6 or 7 miles outside of town. And he said it was an area that was kind of in a horseshoe shape. There was only one way in and one way out. And it had some high rocks and hills and stuff surrounding it. And he said they picked that location because they didn't want anybody to call the law on them because they were being too loud. He said they'd go out there and play loud music and drink and hang out. And it was out of the way and nobody would bother them and they wouldn't bother anybody. And he said one night they'd been out there. One of his other friends had gone off away from the crowd to go relieve himself. And while he was over there, he said that's where he spotted that little short hairy man up on the hill, standing there overlooking everybody, watching them.
Wow.
And yeah, so he pointed up at it and he told everybody, hey, look, what's that? And when they turned around and looked, he said all the girls started screaming. And of course, all the guys, everyone started scrambling for their vehicles. He said they all jumped in their cars and peeled out of there. He said it was a little short, hairy man. He goes, exactly like a Bigfoot. He said, but it was little. He said it wasn't huge. It was up on the hill. He said it was looking down on everybody. And then, of course, they got scared and tore up out of there. And that whole area out there, it's known for those little hairy things because I had heard where this other person that was working in Fort Stockton, Texas, which relatively speaking, it's not too far from Marfa and Alpine. It's all out there in that area. But in Fort Stockton, this guy had been assigned to work temporarily there in Fort Stockton, and he was like a amateur geologist, or somehow he had an interest in rocks. So on the weekend, there wasn't much to do over there around Fort Stockton. He took his daughter and they went out looking for rocks. And this happened in the daytime, out there where there's scrub brush and stuff, and it's real dry. He said they were out there looking for the different rocks and formations. Next thing you know, he looked behind him and they were being followed by a group of little hairy people. That's what he called them, little hairy people. Basically, again, it's the same thing. They're described, they're like Bigfoot, but they're like on a real small scale. And of course, he didn't want to alarm his daughter, so he didn't tell her because she was a little girl and didn't want to freak her out. But they were being followed by these hairy people, and this happened in broad daylight. And my dad was born in Imperial, Texas, which is not that far from over there either. And there was a story that he would tell me and my brothers when we were kids. He said that when he was a little kid, about 5 or 6 years old, he was playing in his backyard there in Imperial, Texas. And he said that a ghost would throw pebbles at him. And he didn't have a fence around his yard. It was just open out to the pasture, to the scrub brush and the desert. And he'd be out there. My dad was the oldest in his family, so he'd be out there playing by himself. And he said all of a sudden he'd have little pebbles tossed at him, and he would look around, and this happened in broad daylight. And he said there wasn't anybody there. So every time my dad told this story, he would tell us it was ghosts, right? Well, now that I'm older and I know that the little rock throwing stuff is the kind of stuff that Bigfoot does.
Yeah.
I don't think maybe it was ghosts. Well, he thinks it was ghosts, but I think maybe it was those little hairy things that are running around out there, tossing little pebbles at the kids. And knowing what I know now, it's no wonder he didn't turn up as a missing 411.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So is there a history like that? Does it go back about there being like, a class of people this size in the area? Like, does it go back to like Native American legend or?
No, the only reason I'm saying that is because I've heard so many people either call in or write in
Right.
to the different shows describing their encounters with these little short hairy people that.
Yeah, the little people.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing, there's that Texas website for Bigfoot I was telling you about.
Yeah.
There was an actual full-size Bigfoot sighting there in Imperial, Texas, where my dad's from, near the Pecos River. That there was documented 2 fishermen saw one over there. And you think of West Texas, you don't think about Bigfoot.
No.
Because there's not a lot of water and there's not a lot of trees or places to hide. But I think they're interdimensional. And I say that because people try to say, yeah, there's the habitat for them to hide. Oh yeah, there's plenty of food source. Yeah, there's water. Yeah, they migrate. Oh yeah, okay, what about the tracks that disappear? Like they just stop. Well, I heard a couple other pretty famous guys say, well, that's just because they're backtracking in their own tracks. Okay, let me grant you that, right? What about the other witnesses that see them disappear? They didn't walk back in the tracks. They watched them disappear.
Yeah.
Either just fade out, or they flash out into a flash of light and they're gone, or they just flat out just like blink and they're gone. And that's why I think they have they're part natural, but I think there's more to them. And that's why I think you've had sightings in West Texas, because I don't think they're here in our realm full time. I think they pop in and out as they want.
I think you could be right. There's definitely something else going on with them. There's something more to it than just, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not completely convinced that's just flesh and blood that you're dealing with.
Right. Yeah. And of course, I'm sure you've heard of Melba Ketchum's DNA study.
Oh, yeah.
And so what is that male unknown part? What is that?
Right. Right.
The mitochondrial is human. That's the female. The nuclear DNA, the male, is unknown. Oh, wow. What a coincidence.
Yeah, that's what opens the door to the whole Nephilim theory, right?
Yeah, it does. And I'm not saying that they are Nephilim,
right?
But the same type of meddling it could be at hand,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I think, because I don't know. It just we can't really say anything definitively about it, since none of us, like Wes always says, no one has one in their garage that they're studying.
Right. Yeah, it's been a little while since I listened to Wes's show. But you were on Sasquatch Chronicles, weren't you?
Yes, sir. Back in August of 2014, episode 37. It's called Cops and Sasquatch. And the reason I was on it, I didn't see Sasquatch. But what happened is, back then, I was a sergeant over the canine unit. And 2 of my canine officers, when you get a new handler on the canine team, we go out and pick out a dog for them and buy the dog. Well, they have to go to a 6-week school down in San Antonio to train the dog, train with the dog, get them acclimated and get the dog trained up, right? So these 2 guys that were on our canine unit, and our canine unit was attached to the SWAT team. So anytime the SWAT team would get called out, we would get called out. So this was the canine unit's considered a tactical unit, and they're attached to the SWAT team, but they're also an independent unit when there's not a SWAT call out. And so these guys had their own Tahoes, brand new Tahoes. We had bought them. And so they were going down to San Antonio for 6 weeks to train with the dogs. And what would happen is, when they got done with the school on Friday afternoons, they would haul butt back to Odessa, and then they'd have to go back to San Antonio by Sunday afternoon so they could be ready for class on Monday. And what was cool about those Tahoes is, once you were that far out of town and you're away from the radio tower, you could still talk vehicle to vehicle without it picking up back home in Odessa off the radio tower, because
Sweet.
you were out of range from the radio tower, so they could talk to each other in the vehicle. So this happened on a Friday night, and they were trying to get back to Odessa, and so they're flying. Oh, let me tell you, this happened between Ozona, Texas, which is on Interstate 10, and then there's a state highway that leads directly north from Ozona to Big Lake, Texas. They were on that state highway between Ozona and Big Lake. They were headed northbound towards Big Lake. They got right about at the middle in between both towns. They're the only two towns there on that place out there is desolate. There's cattle ranches and stuff, but as far as towns and stuff, there is no towns. It's Ozona and then it's Big Lake. So they're flying home that night, and come to find out they were going something like 75 or 80 miles an hour because it's nighttime. Which, you know what, that in itself is dangerous, because I drove that same highway one night and I counted 21 deer.
Oh yeah.
So you don't really want to be going 75 or 80 and have one of them run out in front of you. But that's what they were doing, because they were trying to get home. It was a Friday night when all of a sudden something big and black is on the right side of on the right side of the road up against a barbed wire fence. This thing was big and black, and it was huge, and it comes running from the fence line, like right off the side of the road. It takes off running, and when the lead officer saw it, his name's Lewis. He's actually on the show also. When he saw it, it was coming right perpendicular to him on his passenger door, and he said it was coming so fast and it was so huge. He said he braced for impact. Whatever it was going to hit him.
Mm.
And he said, next thing you know, it did not hit him. What it did is it veered north and started running alongside of him on all fours. And he says this thing was so big, you could see it from the window. You could see its back up even with the window running next to him.
In a Tahoe.
In a Tahoe, going 75 or 80. Some four-legged black thing was running next to him. And I asked him, I said, well, what was it? When you looked at it, what was it? He said, I didn't look over at it. He said, I got so scared. He said, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. He said, I was afraid to look over and see what it is.
Yeah.
He said it was keeping up. And of course, mind you, the other officer's behind him. So he's seeing this thing too.
It has to be.
Yes. So this is what happened. He said right after that, it veered off again and they lost it. And he picks up his microphone. He picked up his microphone and he called back there to the other officer and he said, what was that? And the other officer, he said he just kind of had a nervous laugh. And he said, I don't know. And that was the extent of that conversation.
Wow. Man.
So my friend Lewis came back and told me about it, right? And so he said this thing didn't have any kind of snout, or his face wasn't long like you would expect on a horse or a cow. It basically had like a round type head.
Mm.
Now, he did remember seeing that much of it to at least know that it's not a horse or a cow.
Right.
And that's probably why it freaked him out so much, because this thing was huge. It was black. It was super fast. He thought it was going to collide with the Tahoe, which good luck explaining that one, you know?
Yeah.
And so he told me to talk to the other officer. The other officer, he refused to talk about it. And I asked him about it in private, just me and him. I was their sergeant. And I said, hey man, so what was this I saw out there on the highway? He laughed. He goes, I have no idea. He goes, I don't know. And that's it. He wouldn't say anything else. You couldn't get him to talk about it. But whatever it was, he saw it. And so Lewis and I went on Sasquatch Chronicles, and that's the extent of the story. And it's actually only like the last 6.5 minutes of the show when he brought us on.
Yeah.
And then guess what? My phone dropped me. So I got dropped. I didn't get to finish talking to him because if I had, let me tell you what I would have told him. One night I was listening to that famous nationwide show that comes on AM radio during the night shift.
Uh-huh.
One night I was working and I was listening to that show. And this was back in 2011. This guy called in, and you're not going to believe this, okay? This guy called in and he said, yeah, he said, I need to tell you about something that happened to my wife and I back in 89. And he said, I live in Abilene now, Abilene, Texas. He said, but back then I lived in Odessa. And he said, we were driving to San Antonio one night. He said, my wife was driving. He said, because I can't see good at night. And he said, we were between Big Lake and Ozona on the highway. And he said, and we were going to drive, and I was awake and talking to her. That way I would help keep her awake. He said, when next thing you know, he said, we saw this big black hairy thing standing on two legs on the left side of the highway, on the side of the road.
Mm.
And he said, as we went by, I asked my wife, did you see that bear? And she looked at him and said, you know damn well that wasn't a bear. She said, did you see what it was holding? And he said, no. She said, it was holding a baby one, and the hair on that one was a yellowish blonde color.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that blew my mind. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Because that's the exact same highway where my guys saw that big black thing that ran out on all fours.
Yes.
And that's the thing I was going to tell Wes, but my call dropped, and then that was it. I mean, I never came back on, and I couldn't get back in touch with him. So that was the last part that's missing off the episode 37. That last part I just told you.
Yeah.
I meant to tell him about it, and I never got to.
Oh my goodness. That's just like that much more credibility to your officers, and they can corroborate the caller for that famous AM show.
Yeah. Yeah. I just didn't say it just in case I didn't know what the rules are on all that.
Oh, I don't care about all that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It was a caller to coast, and the guy said it was a Bigfoot. And I know the people heard that. Most of them are thinking Bigfoot out there. No way. There's no forest out there. It's scrub brush. And but I'm telling you, out there, I mean, they're not as prolific as all the sightings out here in East Texas. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean. But there have been sightings out there. And yeah, that blew my mind. That dude said that happened back in '89, and my guys had their incident in the fall around, I believe it was around August or September of 2009. So it was 20 years later on the same highway.
It seemed like there was a population then for sure. Or like you say, interdimensional travel, there could be a portal or something there.
Yeah, or a lot of Native Americans say they live underground.
That's true too.
Yeah, first time I ever heard that, I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
That's what's funny is a lot of the times I'll hear something, and when I first hear it, I'll laugh and I think it's ridiculous. But what's funny is I'm the one that doesn't know, and I think they sound funny, and then years later I find out other stuff, and I realize I was the fool.
That's called wisdom, man. You're actually able to admit it out loud, so that's even better for you.
Yeah, but it gets frustrating when you're trying to wake everyone else up and they're still.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Things that even I question myself about, and then a few years later I'm saying, oh yeah, I was right. Huh. That's what I get.
Yeah. As far as you're right. That was some validation as far as for what my guys had seen. But you see, my guys didn't actually say it was Bigfoot.
Right.
I think Lewis leaned that way I told him about that deal that I'd heard. No, I didn't tell him about that till later. But I told him that I thought maybe it was Bigfoot based on because that happened in 09, and then they told me about that. And then in 2011, I heard the guy come on the radio. And so by 2014, that's when me and Lewis went on Sasquatch Chronicles.
Nice.
So that's actually the chronological order of how it happened.
Nice.
But I could tell you a skinwalker story that I found out from one of my other officers.
Yeah, absolutely. I hardly ever get to talk about skinwalkers, and I know people say that the name alone is cursed and you can't mention it or whatever, but
Yes, that's what the Native Americans believe for sure.
yeah.
They don't even mention it or else.
Mm.
But so this was a new officer that came onto my shift. She was a female, and she was from Farmington, New Mexico. And so, of course, I asked her about all the same stuff because you've heard of Linda Harris from the Four Corners area, the Bigfoot investigator. She's Native American.
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with her or not.
Okay, well, she's come on all the shows,
Okay.
all the shows. Her name's Linda Harris, and she lives up there in the Four Corners area, which that Farmington, New Mexico is real close to it. And the San Juan River's up there. So there's a lot of Bigfoots. Have you heard? Do you remember J.C. Johnson? God rest his soul.
I hate to be 0 for 2, but I don't think so.
Yeah, J.C. Johnson used to investigate the same Four Corners area that Brenda Harris did.
Okay.
So he's got a San Juan River. You can look up his stories. They're pretty interesting. They've been on that San Juan River before, and they had lost track of time. They had the sky turn different colors, kind of like a time warp or something. I don't know, another dimension. So all this weird happens in that Four Corners area near Farmington, New Mexico. Right close to there is what people call Dulce, New Mexico, and the UFO sightings.
Yeah, that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, the cattle mutilations. Well, Dulce, New Mexico, Dulce means sweet in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
That's where all that stuff, all that weird stuff happens right there in that Four Corners area. From Bigfoot to UFOs, cattle mutilations, time warps, you name it. And that's the area that J.C. Johnson dated, and it's also the area Linda Harris did. So we had our own weird experience in Farmington, which I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Okay.
But she came from that town. That was her hometown. And she was a new officer on my shift. And what I did with all of them was ask them, hey, have you ever seen anything weird, anything strange? Have you ever seen Bigfoot? Especially right there, that San Juan River runs right through Farmington. And I knew that Bigfoot's in that area because of the reservations over there, and that's where Linda Harris investigated it. And then she said, no. She said, I never saw Bigfoot. She said, but I did see a skinwalker one night. I said, oh, really? I said, tell me about it. She said, when I was in high school, she used to play organized sports, volleyball, basketball. And she said one night she was giving one of her teammates a ride home, and the teammate lived on the reservation. So she went and dropped her off at her house, and then she headed back home. And this was at night after practice. And then she said, next thing you know, she drove a Jeep. And she said, next thing you know, she looked over, and running right next to her vehicle was this big gray wolf.
Mm.
Yeah. And it had glowing eyes. The only thing I don't remember is if the eyes were glowing yellow or if they were glowing red. But she said this wolf was so big. She said it was right up next to her vehicle and window. She said it was the biggest. The wolf was so big, it was unnaturally big. And the fact that its eyes were glowing, it freaked her out. She said she punched it and got out of there. And so the next day when she saw her friend at school, she told her what happened, that's what had happened after she dropped her off, and says, do you ever see anything like that? You have any idea what was going on or what? And her Native American teammate told her, you saw a skinwalker. That's what that was.
Wow.
I said, wow, you're the first person I've ever heard had a face-to-face one-on-one with a skinwalker, that, as far as you hear about the stories, but she was the first person I personally knew that had an experience like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Those encounters are so hard to come by, and even fewer, when they do experience it, they won't talk about it,
Right. I don't know what you've heard about that, but I've heard that when the people become one of those, it's all evil, black magic, occult type stuff. And
Yeah.
I've heard they've got to murder a family member
Yeah.
to basically hold to get those powers and abilities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I heard the same thing. That's really dark. And somebody that would be that selfish to go to that length for power, that's a very disturbing thing to think about.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you something very disturbing that happened to my family and I there in Farmington, New Mexico. This was back in July of 2014. We took a 3-week vacation. It was one of them bucket list vacations. I always wanted to drive on the Pacific Coast Highway, and my wife always wanted to see a real life waterfall.
Yeah.
And during those 3 weeks, we visited 9 Western US states. And she got to see tons of waterfalls, and I got to drive on the Pacific Coast Highway.
Nice.
So it's one of those trips we had to save up for months, and we planned it a year ahead of time to be able to pull it off, because 3 weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
And so probably I think it was the second day of the trip. We were in Farmington, New Mexico. And the only reason I wanted to swing by there is because there's some national parks and stuff, like the Aztec, New Mexico has that underground building that it was like 106 outside in July. And it was 70 something degrees inside that Native American building with mud bricks. It was the neatest thing. And it had open windows and doors. But the way it was designed and built, it was 70 something degrees in there. It was like over 100 outside. It's a national park. So you got your national park passport, you can get your national park stamp. So I wanted to go by there, but I wanted to swing by and see the San Juan River in Farmington, because Linda Harris was always talking about Bigfoot in the San Juan River. So we came across the San Juan River on the highway that comes in south of Farmington, right south of town. And all of a sudden we're on the San Juan River. It's right there. And so all I wanted was a picture of it, right? And so we thought, a lot of rivers, once you go over the bridge, if you pull up around the other side, sometimes there's a place where people park or go fishing or whatever, Well, this one wasn't like that. There's no way to get off the road under the bridge. And I'll tell you something else. That bridge was real deep. The water was real deep. And this was in July. So I don't know if it's from snow melt off the mountains or what, but it was powerful. It was deep and wide. It was more powerful, wider, and deeper than any river I'd ever seen in Texas.
Really?
And I'm not used to seeing rivers rush that fast like that. It was pretty awe-inspiring just to see that river. But we didn't get the picture or pull off on the side like I'd planned. And there was a curb on the side. So if you were going to pull over there, you'd have to jump the curb. And so we ended up passing the river. And I was going to keep going westbound on that highway and see if I could find a turnaround. And I asked my wife to get a picture of the river when we came back around. So there wasn't a place to turn. So I finally just had to turn on the road,
Yeah.
And so we started heading back eastbound towards the bridge and towards the river. And at this point, my wife has her phone out. She's getting ready to take a picture of the river for me. She rolls her window down. And all of a sudden, well, mind you, this is in broad daylight in the afternoon, like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. This guy comes out from under the bridge by the river, and he's walking up on the side of the road. And he's now eastbound, same direction we're headed, but we're coming up behind him. And his arms are flailing in the air. He's kind of, his hips are kind of moving side to side, real awkward looking. And he's waving his arms, and we're both looking at this guy now. We completely forgot about the river. We're now looking at this guy, and we're getting closer and closer. And she said, I said, what is wrong with this guy? And then my wife's part Native American and part Mexican, like me. And she said, it was probably a drunk guy. And, but he wasn't acting like at first we thought he was a drunk guy, right?
Right.
So, but if we get closer, I'm slowing down. One, to not run over him, and two, because we had intended to get a picture of the river. So as we pull up, as we're coming up next to him, we had slowed way down at this point. We slowed way down, and then we were shocked at what happened next. The guy looks over at us, and Bo, I am not kidding you when I tell you this man was hissing, growling, gurgling, and it sounded like he was arguing with himself. He was covered in sweat. His arms were flailing and swaying in the air. He looks over. His eyes are so bloodshot red. Not like glowing red, but like bloodshot red. But the kind where, if you've ever seen those weightlifting magazines, when the guys are squatting and it looks like their eyes are going to pop out and you can see all the little red veins in the eyes.
Oh, yeah.
His eyes look like that. And they look so weird. I don't know, man. I don't want to say they were cat eyes, but they were strange looking eyes. And as we went by, and all these noises are emanating from this one person, he locks eyes with me. Like me and him make eye contact, right? And in my mind, what I projected to him was, yeah, go ahead, just try it, buddy, see what happens. Because I'm going to tell you, we were heavily armed on this trip.
Right.
And at this point, I was still thinking it was a guy that was high on drugs or drunk. But you know what? We were so shocked by all the different sounds coming from him that we even forgot to get a picture of the river. So I went and found a parking lot that was a distance away, and we pulled in there. We were kind of all shocked. My daughter was right there on the back seat. Her window was down. And so my wife was in the passenger seat. They all saw and heard this. My old son saw it. My youngest son was asleep. So he's the only one that didn't see this. But this thing, I call it a thing now because it locked eyes with me, right? And my wife's an emergency room nurse. And I'd been a cop for years, okay? So we've both seen people that are high on different types of drugs. We've seen people drunk. We've seen people that are drunk and high.
Right.
This was something else. The worst out of control high people I've ever seen are the ones that are on the bath salts.
Mm-hmm.
You almost think they're possessed, right? This guy right here, there was something else going on. Where initially we thought it was alcohol or drugs. But we're sitting there, right? And then my daughter says, "Aren't you going to call the police?" The police? Are you kidding me? At that point, I'm thinking, this guy needs a priest. And then, as fast as that river was rushing, I was thinking, nah, this guy's walking on his own way. I said, we're going to let him go about his business. And we went northbound and we got out of there. And I couldn't really shake that because we all heard the growling. We heard hissing. We heard gurgling, and we heard like it was. It's impossible to have that many sounds come from one pair of vocal cords.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, man.
And the other thing, the more I thought about it, it locked eyes with me
Mhm.
almost as if whatever that was going on there, as if it knew that I'm the head of the household.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It locked eyes with me when we went by.
Mm.
And mind you, I got to thinking, this is where that officer, where she had seen the skinwalker. This is where the reservation is nearby.
Yeah.
And these people have to do certain things to be able to become that. And, you know, thinking about it over the years, I was thinking, what if that's what that was going on with that dude? What if he was one of those that had done something bad to get the abilities?
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying that's what it was, but I feel you know, I'm convinced whatever that was, it was demonic.
My goodness.
And it was a lot scarier after you think about it later.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time when it's happening, yeah, it freaked us out and it shocked us. But at that moment when it was happening, I was still thinking drugs or alcohol. You know?
Yeah.
You know, but there was something going on with this guy, and it was more disturbing in retrospect than it was right at the moment.
Man. And you know, you're right. At first, you probably thought drugs or alcohol, and your brain tries to rationalize things, you know?
Yeah.
So given time to think, you can put things together. And I just think that's, well, it's scary in a way, and it's sad for that individual in a way.
Yeah.
But it's, I don't know how to say it without it sounding goofy, but it's kind of like more validation of the world we live in. You know, that the spiritual forces are real, and people can be possessed, people can be demonized, and you know, you got to see that firsthand. Was it
Yeah.
an initiate into a skinwalker? You know, was he somebody that was halfway through the process, hiding under this bridge? Who knows? But my goodness, I'm glad you were in a vehicle. Well, you know, that your family was safe.
Yeah. And then I thought about, well, what if this is his daytime persona, and then at night it's the other?
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, that was a deal. I meant to tell you this last time, and I forgot to tell you this story. This happened in December of 2020 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we had gone, I had never been to Oklahoma. And we'd gone to take a trip up there to meet my daughter and son-in-law there. He was going to pick up a part for his 18-wheeler. And so they asked us just to meet him up there for the weekend. And well, actually, it was just a one-night thing. And so we went up there and we stayed at this downtown hotel, one of the skyrise type, there in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what's interesting about Tulsa, Oklahoma. As soon as I drove into town, it smelled like oil and petroleum. Now, the reason that caught my attention is because that's exactly what Odessa, Midland smells like. My hometown.
Yeah.
When you drive in, it smells like that. And people go, "Oh man, it stinks here." And then the people over there go, "Oh man, that's the smell of money."
That's it.
So this just I didn't think anywhere else in the world smelled like Odessa, Midland, but apparently Tulsa, Oklahoma does too.
Nice.
So we stayed at this downtown high-rise hotel. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because I don't remember what it was called. But let me tell you what happened to us there. We had brought my son's little pug, her name's Sparky, with an I. He was going to be a Sparky, but all they had was a female, so he kept the name and changed the last letter.
There you go.
So we brought Sparky, right? And Sparky's not your full-size pug. Sparky was the runt of the litter. And she's 3 years old now and hasn't got any bigger.
Oh my goodness.
So she's still a tiny little pug. And we brought her along on this trip. And what was strange that night is while we were still all up, she would stand anywhere she stood in the room. She was looking at this empty chair that was in the corner of the room. And she would just stare at that chair. Well, that started freaking us out. And we'd say, "What do you see, Sparky? What's over there?" And I don't know, there was something in that chair. So we get ready to go to bed. We say our prayers, and then we let the boys stay up. And my wife and I were in the other bed. And of course, I fell asleep pretty quick. And then Sparky was laying on the bed with the boys. And she was laying between both boys, but on top of the blankets. In the middle of the night, my wife heard a noise that sounded like choking, like gurgling or choking sound. And she looked over at their bed and saw Sparky's like she was being picked up by her neck, like something was jerking her up.
Oh my gosh.
Like strangling her with her own. She was wearing those little body harnesses.
Yeah.
That's what she was wearing, was a body harness, and whatever this was lifting her up by her neck sideways and was jerking her head up.
Mm.
She was choking. So my wife calls over to her and says, Sparky, come here. And then, of course, whatever it was, let her go. She snaps out of it. She ran over there onto our bed. And then my wife put her under the blankets between us and was holding her. And then she tried to go back to sleep. She said the next thing you know, she said something started tugging on the sheets down at her feet.
Ooh.
Yeah. And she looked down and there wasn't nothing there. So at that point, she started praying. And then it went away. And we were somewhere, I want to say we were on the 6th floor or the 7th floor of this hotel. And we didn't write down the room number. And that's what happened that night. There was something in that particular room which she had been looking at while we were all still up. And then later that night, whatever it was, came over there and was trying to choke her out or something. I don't know what was going on.
Wow.
But she didn't tell me any of this till in the morning. So I didn't know any of this had happened.
You slept there with ghosts all night long, man.
and that's why that's why we pray for protection at night, brother.
Amen. Amen. Every night. Hey, on that note, I know it's not really off topic. You just mentioned it, but I had written down here because last time when you were on the show, we opened up with a prayer.
Right.
And I thought I would ask you, are there any specific prayers that you, and I have it written down. I'd show you this, but you know, I could have written it at any time, but I did before the show started, before I even got onto the thing with you.
Right.
Are there any specific prayers that you have for protection against the demonized or evil? And that's exactly how I wrote it. I had no clue you were going to tell me about that guy under the bridge. But are there any psalms or anything that you say, or any prayers specific?
No, sir. I don't know any specific prayers. I just, when I pray, I ask for specific things.
Right.
Of course, I always ask to be forgiven of my sins.
Absolutely.
As I know I'm sinful every day. You either do something or you may even just think something.
Yeah.
You know, and just that alone right there, it's a miracle. God doesn't just take us out just for that.
Oh.
But I ask for specific things. I ask for continued blessings and protection. I ask the Lord to bless our house. I ask the Lord to protect us while we sleep. I ask him to send his guardian angels to watch over us while we sleep. And as far as protection goes, I ask for those specific things right there that I just told you.
Right.
But I don't have any specific prayers or psalms that I read. I really should, but I don't have any memorized.
Right. Well, I just have a couple of, prayers memorized.
Okay.
I'm trying to learn, because every night I try to read Psalm 23,
Okay.
and 91. 91 goes pretty deep into protection, but it's such a longer psalm. I can't get it memorized to save myself from trouble, but I can read it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, I figured I would ask you that because I have a little, I don't want to say routine, but I have set things that I do at night before bed. And I'm always wanting to learn more and pick up things, anything to strengthen myself or my family against spiritual warfare.
Right.
I'm all about it. So.
Right. And I always tell my boys and my family, it's important for us to get on our knees
Yes.
when we pray, to show reverence towards the Lord and show submission. And someday each of us will be standing before him, and we're all knee shall bow before him. The only difference is we'll already be used to it.
I love that. Yes. Very good. To humble ourselves now.
Yes, sir. Man, I had a terrifying experience here in this house where I live now. I could tell you the exact date. It was back in 2016.
Yeah.
And it was on September the 21st. It was such a harrowing experience that I even remember the date.
Yeah.
And I had backslidden back then, Bo. I wasn't even going to church.
Right.
I was not praying. I was drinking heavily. And it was just a bad time. And of course, my wife and I were doing a lot of arguing, as you can imagine, with me drinking all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And there was something terrible happened that I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. When we bought this house, there was always like a sense of darkness in the house. Like, it didn't matter how many lights you turned on, it never seemed bright in here. Like there was just like a darkness in it, even with lights. It's the strange thing. You would have to see it to know what I'm talking about. But between the arguing that we were doing and one time before that, when we first moved in, I was cleaning out I'll tell you something that irritated me. You could tell that the upstairs loft bedroom had belonged to a little girl. And I knew that the previous owner had 2 daughters that had grown up in this house. And the room was painted, parts of the room were painted pink, but this little girl had hand painted black cats on the light switches, and she had black stars and black moons and all kinds of things I didn't like. Right. And then what really irritated me is I found this big drawing in the attic when I was cleaning out the attic. And what it looked like a black wraith.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Wraith, like WRAITH.
Yes.
And it was like a black hooded figure. And it was floating in the foreground. And then in the background, it looked like this person had drawn this house.
Oh.
So it looked like it was in the backyard of this house was this black wraith with a pointed hood. And this house in the background. Couple that with the black cats and black stars and all that crap on the walls.
Right.
I took, you know what I did? I took that drawing, I showed it to my wife, and she goes, like, so what? It's just a kid's drawing. I go, look at that. That looks like our house in the background. And what's this black thing? Anyway, she's like, it's just a kid's drawing. I took that kid's drawing out there, out to the burn barrel, and burned it.
Absolutely.
At the time, I had burn barrels. I don't have them now, but when we first moved in, I did.
Right.
And I burned that drawing. And another thing, let me tell you another thing that happened before I get into the harrowing experience.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name the movie because I'll tell you that I'm not sure if it's still there or not. I'll describe the movie. And some of your listeners may have already seen the movie. You might have seen the movie. But it's a scary movie. It was on Netflix. It was like an Australian production. And it was about a kid's book, a scary kid's book. And when the single mom read that book to her little boy, bad stuff started happening. And the name of the book is the name of the movie.
Mm.
I'm not going to repeat that name because when we saw that movie, we thought it was a big joke. And so we said that name out loud and started laughing. And as soon as we did, we heard all kinds of banging and running. Our family room is directly above our garage.
Yeah.
And as soon as we said that name and we all started laughing, because that's the name of the movie and it was a big joke, right? As soon as we said that name, we heard a big commotion coming up the stairs from the garage towards the house.
Oh my gosh.
It was hitting the walls, the stairs, and we all looked at each other. And of course, we stopped laughing.
Yeah.
And right after that happened, at one point, this was weeks had gone by. We were watching another movie, something else up in the family room. When my oldest son saw a black shadow come up the stairs to his right, to all of us, to the right of him, and he was behind all of us. This black shadow comes up the stairs, and then it went right through the wall into the direction of the attic.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah, so you couple that noise downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and we had a Great Dane at the time. His name was Gunner. We thought he'd somehow got in the garage and had come up the stairs, and he was making all that racket.
Right.
Because what I did is I went down there to check because I thought it was Gunner. And that's when I got creeped out. The garage doors were closed and there was nothing down there. So that freaked us out, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Now, let me tell you what ended up happening. And I already told you I wasn't going to church and I wasn't praying. And my little brother came to visit, him and his family. And he is praying and he's a deacon in the church. And I told him what was going on. And he said, pray. He said, you just need to pray. Well, I knew I wasn't living right, Bo, so I wasn't about to pray,
Right.
even though it is the right thing to do. So I asked him to pray in our house. And he did, willingly and gladly. He started down there in the garage and went and prayed in every room. And after that, that stuff stopped. Those noises and the shadows, they stopped.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. But the harrowing thing that had happened before he prayed is what happened to me that night.
Yeah.
And this is so strange. It's kind of difficult to explain it to you because unless you experience it, you would never fully appreciate it. I woke up that night. It was the middle of the night. And I got up to use the bathroom. And I felt strange. I felt like I wasn't even in my own body. And at that point, it made me think, okay, I'm dreaming, right? I have to be dreaming because this feels weird. It doesn't feel like it feels like I'm not even walking in my own body, like it's not my body, which that in itself is crazy. And so I went in there to the bathroom to use the bathroom, and I flipped on the light and it didn't come on. And so I thought, okay, I'm having a nightmare. And I turned it back off. And then when I turned it off, it got even darker. So I flipped it back on and I looked, and that's when I noticed the light bulbs. You could see the little wire inside of them.
Right.
Where it was lit up. These were clear light bulbs, the kind you could see through clearly. And the little wires were lighting up, but the bulb was not coming on. So I flipped the light back off and saw it. And yeah, it was turning on and off, but it wasn't lighting up the room. And
Wow.
I thought, it felt so strange, Bo. I thought I was having a nightmare. So the next thing I did is I pinched my arm. And I could feel it. I'm actually pinching myself.
Wow.
So now I realize I'm not dreaming. I'm awake. And then this feeling of dread came over me because I thought, I'm dead. I'm thinking I'm going to walk back over there and my body's still going to be laying there.
Right.
It's so scared out of my wits. I walk over there and I look, and I'm not laying there. So at this point, I'm thinking, oh crap, something's going on. I don't know what's going on. And I run downstairs because I'm thinking, I remember, oh man, the boys, they're downstairs. So I went to check on the boys. I checked on the boys. They're sound asleep. They're fine. So at this point, something's still going on. I don't feel right. I don't even feel like I'm in my own body. But I am in my own body, but I don't feel like I am. So I try to call upstairs to my wife. And now I can't get any sound to come out of my mouth.
What?
Yes, I could not speak. I'm trying to speak and sound will not come out. I'm making some groaning noises because I'm trying to call her name out. On the third attempt, I was able to say her name, but it was weak. And she woke up and heard me, but our room's an open loft to downstairs. So I called to her from downstairs. And she said, what's wrong? What's going on? I said, I don't know what's going on. I said, but the lights aren't turning on. They're not turning on fully. It's dim. I said, something strange is going on. So I said, check that light out there. We have a little balcony out there that has its own light bulb.
All right.
So she checked that one. I went to the back door and I opened the back door and I was flipping on that back light, and the same thing was happening. The lights would not, they were coming on, but they were real dim. They wouldn't light up anything.
Wow.
So after I flipped it on 2 or 3 times, finally they came on. And then she said, yeah, the same thing's happening up here. That it's not wanting to work. She said, but they're not out completely. It's just real dim. I said, I know that's what's going on. So I reshut the door and I went back upstairs with her. And I laid down with her. I told her I don't feel right. I said, I don't feel like I'm in my body. I feel like I'm about to come out of my body. And I asked her, just hold me. So I just backed up to her and asked her, just hold me. That's all. I just closed my eyes, and it's the strangest thing, Bo. I had to feel her arms around me to feel like she was holding me in place. Like I felt like I was going to float away or float off or something. It's the strangest thing. I can't explain it. And she said, and I mind you, I closed my eyes, right? She said, right when this happened, she saw this black shadow, a big, tall black shadow, a see-through shadow, moved along our bedroom wall on the same side of the room that those sliding doors are at towards the balcony. She saw that black shadow move across there. And I never saw this because at this point my eyes are closed and I'm telling her, hold me. She saw that black thing move through there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was scary, man. I thought at one point I thought I was dead. I thought I was literally still laying in the bed. It felt so strange. I've never had an experience like that scared me that bad.
All right.
And I've never had one since that day. Just that one time. And it was so out of this world unusual. I thought it was a nightmare, and it wasn't. I was wide awake. And what I should have been doing, Bo, is praying, right?
Yeah.
But I had not been going to church. I had been drinking heavily. I had not been praying. And so my thought in my mind was, oh, now you're scared. Now you need God. Now you're going to pray to him. And so that's the only reason I didn't pray. I realized that's stupid. I should have been praying anyway. Even if I hadn't been, I should have done it. And if something like that were to happen again, God forbid, but if it did, I'd be praying immediately. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes. That shows you just how important it is to stay prayed up. You know, we don't let our guards down like that. It's because being a Christian, we're target number one. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we are. That one, that's something funny I need to bring up. When I was listening to our interview that we did, at one point you'd asked me, why do you think all this stuff's happened to your family, this and that? And I had told you, well, you know, when you're doing good, the enemy tries to trip you up. That's what I had told you. And then my wife had heard that interview and she goes, you should have told Bo it's because y'all were all acting bad or doing bad and being a bunch of badasses, and that's what happens.
I think our wives would get along.
Exactly. So I'm over here giving you this good answer, and then she goes, yeah, you should have told him this.
They keep us humble too.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Man, that was scary.
That sounds terrifying, man. I couldn't imagine. Because, you know, it sounds like had you not gotten your wife involved, it could have been the end. You know, who knows what kind of power that had over you.
Right.
Man, that's so terrifying.
You know, I don't know what the people that lived here before, I don't know what they messed with or didn't mess with. I don't know what they did. I don't know what portals or doorways they opened. I don't know. I don't know what was going on with the drawing and the painting and the dark feeling in the house. You know, the drinking and the arguing may not have caused it, but it definitely didn't help it.
Right. Yeah, it could have woke it up. You know what I mean? Kind of stirred the pot a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'll tell you what, man, I would not wish that on my enemies. It was scary, man.
Yeah, that is. That's terrifying. And how long was it? Was it the next day that you had the house prayed over?
No, the man. I'm not sure when that movie came out, but when my brother visited and prayed over the house, would have been no shorter than months later. And really, you would hear like that banging and stuff down in the garage. You would continue to hear stuff like that, or you'd see the occasional shadow or whatever.
Right.
But after he prayed over the house, I mean, it was different. Things were different. It was a lot better. And we didn't hear that. We didn't see that stuff. We didn't hear that stuff anymore. And of course, that incident that happened that night, that nothing like that happened after that, just that one time. But I'll tell you what, that was bad enough the one time that I remember the exact date.
Wow.
Yeah, last September was 5 years ago.
Wow.
It's gonna be 6 years here shortly.
Yeah. You know, my wife had a visual. It was nowhere near to the extent of yours, but it was in the upstairs of our house. As you come out of one bedroom and in front of another bedroom door, there was just like, it's always dark in that hallway, but it's like the shadow was darker than dark, and she felt like she was being stared at. She said it was so dark that she reached out. I'm giving myself chills right now. It was so dark that she reached out and put her hand through it just to see, you know, was there something hanging there?
Oh man.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done. I would not have.
I know. Me neither. I would have jumped down the stairwell probably.
Exactly.
But yeah, man. But we keep our prayers up now. Yeah, we've had some ups and downs go on, but yeah, I can't stress enough the importance, and I can't imagine going back to a few years ago when I was like, just like you're saying, when I was backslidden and I was drinking every day and fighting mad about everything all the time.
Yeah.
How vulnerable we were. You know, I don't ever want to go back to that.
Right.
You know, I appreciate those stories, man.
Yeah. There was we used to have this deer lease down in Brownwood, Texas. And there was several of us that shared that lease. And there was this one retired Army guy. He had been 30 years in the Army. He was from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And this is back when we still lived in Odessa. We would drive down to Brownwood to go deer hunting. And we would leave our travel trailers there at the base camp. And see, him being an old Army guy, he had built an outhouse out there. It was pretty cool.
Sweet.
Yeah. And so that outhouse was out behind his travel trailer, but we all had permission to use it. The only thing he asked is you replace the toilet paper if you use it. Which that's not a lot to ask.
No, it's not.
But I was over there. I was using that outhouse one time. Well, next thing you know, I hear running and banging inside his travel trailer. And he wasn't there that weekend. It was locked up. And I mean, this was loud and clear as day. The outhouse was only a couple of 2 or 3 feet away from his travel trailer.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was clear. It was clear.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, it was just my wife and our 2 boys and me that weekend up there. And afterwards, I told her what I'd heard to the point. I even went and checked his door. It was locked. And then I knocked on it to see if anyone was in there. And it had been quiet up until that whole weekend. And it was quiet after that. And I told my wife about it. And she's got this bad habit where a lot of times if I tell her something like that, she doesn't really believe me right away.
Right.
Okay, fine. I'm not making it up, you know?
Right.
So we were about to leave, head back to Odessa. So she decided, gonna let the boys have a bathroom break before we left so we could hit the road. So her and the boys went over there and of course put one boy in there and was waiting outside of the outhouse with the other boy standing between the outhouse and the travel trailer. When next thing you know, she heard the exact same thing I had just described. Someone running back and forth inside that travel trailer. And there wasn't anybody in there. It was freaky.
That is.
And so she actually heard what I had told her happened and she hadn't believed me. And then she heard it.
See,
But yeah, go ahead.
when we first moved into this house, we were sitting in the living room and our attic is over the living room side of the house. Our house is built real funky. It's almost like a 3-level. I don't know. It's just weird.
Yeah.
But the attic is above the living room. And we had been in there for about 2 or 3 months in the house. And it sounded like 2 people got into a wrestling match in our attic.
Ooh.
Like it was just thumping and rolling and banging. And
Wow.
my wife looked at me and I looked at her like, which one of us is going to go up there and look, you know? But, you know, of course, I got the short straw on that one, like usual. And I go up there and open the door. Even that's weird. There's like a platform that's about waist high. You step up on it, and then there's a little half door that opens up. So if you just lean over and open that door, it's, you know, it starts at the waist height and goes up to the top of your head. It's a little weird door.
Yeah.
And I'll open it up and there's not a thing out of place. Every Christmas decoration and Halloween stuff, it's all still just sitting exactly the way it was supposed to be. To this day, it's been 3 years. I have no clue what that noise was. You know, no earthly idea. But that happened several times, and still yet, well, it'll sound like something's banging on our wall. but it's a brick house. I wouldn't hear anything banging on that wall, but it could be Bigfoot out there and I wouldn't know.
Right.
So I don't know where these noises come from, man.
It's that unseen realm that Michael Heiser was talking about.
Yes. And sometimes I'll claim that I want to see that stuff, but I don't know if I really do or not.
I can tell you right now, at my age, I've seen enough that my brothers and I, we were stupid when we were little because my mom and dad had so many stories that they would tell us, most of which I've covered already on our last interview.
Right.
And we always just tell my mom and dad, how come we never get to see anything scary? And they go, be quiet. That's stupid. Don't think that way. You don't want to see anything scary. And as a kid, you're thinking, yeah, I do. I want to see the stuff you saw. No, you don't. Just simple stuff like the hairy hand. That scared us. And we didn't actually see anything. We just felt it. But yeah, I don't want to see anything else. It's like when you're a new officer, everyone's in a hurry to go see the dead body. And by the time you wrap up your career, you've seen more death than you ever thought you'd want to see. As a matter of fact, you don't even want to see any more death. The older you get, the more you avoid them because you've seen plenty of death over the years.
Yeah.
I don't want to see more scary stuff. I thought when I retired, I was going to go full-time Bigfoot researching. I really thought that. I thought, all right, I'll finally get to do it and I'll have free time to do that. Let me tell you, the more I find out and hear about those things, I don't want to look for them. Have you heard of Scott Carpenter?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, since you know him, you know what he said. When we go out there looking for these things come looking for you at your house.
Yep.
And I had already come to that conclusion before I ever heard him say that. And the reason I wanted to go look for him is because back then I thought it was a North American undiscovered wood ape. So I thought, yeah, I want to be the one to prove it. You know what? It doesn't make sense that no one's been able to catch one or prove it yet. And like Scott Carpenter said, you don't want to go out there looking for them. They'll come looking for you. And other things come looking for you too with it. And it goes to show it's all related.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be related.
That same deer camp I was telling you about in Brownwood, we had we met this other hunter from down south of Dallas, a town south of Dallas. We met him and his son at that deer lease and his family. And he's still a good friend of ours now. He's originally from California. And now he lives in Tennessee. But he's a real cool dude, Dave. And that one night, let me tell you what happened one night. We weren't going to be able to get there till Saturday night. And him and his son were up there, his son Gunner. They were at the deer camp by themselves that night. And we had this big fire pit in the middle. We used to cook on it. We used to just sit around it and drink beer. And so that night it was just him and his son because me and my family weren't going to get there till the next morning. And man, he was so excited to tell us when we got there. Well, that night while they were sitting there, something started throwing little rocks at them at the deer camp from in the darkness. Now I'm telling you, there was nothing out there. And so, of course, he jumped up to run inside his travel trailer to get his gun. And his son was about 12 years old at the time. And when he saw Dad running, he jumped up and took off running after Dad. And then he went in and slammed the door. Of course, Dave came back out with his gun, and his son refused to come back out and sit with him because he thought his dad got scared and was running for cover when he was really running to get his gun.
Oh man.
He got so scared that he refused to come back out there. But I'll tell you what's funny is Rachel and I wouldn't even been out there if we weren't already armed. Because anytime we were at that deer camp, we were wearing a sidearm on a shoulder holster.
Smart.
But because there's also there had been this big mountain lion that was killed out there. It was within 40 miles of that deer camp.
Oh.
We saw it at the local little convenience store that was there. The people had a picture of it up on the bulletin board. This mountain lion was laying across the tailgate of a pickup truck. Its head, the top of its head was out past the edge of one side of the tailgate, and the back end of the cat was hanging off the other. That's how big that cat was. This was a full-size truck, not no mini truck.
Wow.
And the lady behind the counter, I said, where did this happen? And then she told me the name of the town. I don't remember it now, but it was right there within 40 miles of our deer camp was that mountain lion. And for that reason alone, we each had a sidearm on a shoulder holster anytime we were out there, day or night.
Yeah, no doubt.
And,
I think mountain lions are true monsters. I really do, man. They are killing machines. That's all they're there for.
Yeah. So anyway, something had been throwing rocks at him from in the dark.
Yeah.
And something else had happened around that fire pit. This was another time when it was just Dave was there, and then it was me and my wife that was there. It was just us three. The kids were inside the travel trailer watching cartoons on the DVR or the DVD player. But so all three of us are out there. We're just sitting around the fire. And have you heard of Bigfoot mimicking other animals?
Absolutely, I have. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we heard. But up behind where the deer camp was, there's a hill. And up on that hill, there's a water reservoir, like a pond that the landowner had put in there. And there's some trees up on that hill, and that hill overlooks the deer camp. If you're at the top of that hill, you can see over the travel trailers towards where the fire pit is at if you're standing up on top of that hill. And one night we're sitting around the fire. It was my wife and Dave and I. And next thing you know, we hear the weirdest owl sound. I'd never heard anything like this before. And the truth is, I never even heard an owl before out there. This was the only time this happened. I'm going to try and mimic it for you, what it sounded like. And forgive me if it sounds stupid, but this is the sound it made. It started out like an owl sound, but then it would trail off. It was so weird. It would go, hoot, 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 hoot. It did it like that. It did it like 3 times. And when this happened, we're like looking at each other like, are you hearing this?
Right.
And it was loud. But at the end it would trail off into something else. I don't know what that was. The only thing we knew for sure, whatever that is, it's not an actual owl.
Right.
This was the same little deer camp in Brownwood that they were tossing pebbles at Dave and Gunner.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the same. Yeah. That's the same place where the travel trailer was with the noises in it.
Man. Well, there's something lurking. If it's spiritual, if it's Bigfoot, if it's a spiritual Bigfoot, if it's something, there's something going on.
Yeah. My daughter had a Yorkie. And we were all at that deer camp one time, and all of a sudden, her little Yorkie, he was a yapper. He started yapping into the darkness. And it was one of those situations where normally her and that dog wouldn't go with us. It just so happens this one time they did. And that dog alerted us to something in the darkness that had snuck up and was watching. And had that dog not alerted us, we wouldn't even know whatever it was there. So what I did is I walked over towards it and I cranked off a couple of rounds into the ground in that direction, because I wasn't sure if it was a mountain lion sneaking up watching us, or I don't know if it was something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't be too careful with that kind of stuff. Dogs alert, kids alert. You know what I mean? It seems like the older we get, the more relaxed or aloof or disconnected. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, man. Pop off a couple of rounds if you have to. You're responsible. You know what you're doing.
Yeah, I fired him at the ground, right there, close proximity to where I was at. But because you don't ever know who or what it was, but whatever it was, I was telling him to stay away. And you're right about the kids alerting. Back when I still lived in Odessa, one time I was chasing my oldest son. He had just learned how to walk. So he would like me to chase him around the couch in the living room. And I'd been chasing him and I was playing like I was a monster. And he's giggling and running, and he just started walking and running. And I chased him around the couch a couple times. Next thing you know, he gets over by the foyer area, the front foyer, and he freaks out. He screams, turns around, takes off running, and he's screaming and crying, and he's looking back behind him like something's chasing him. He runs right towards me with his arms out. I pick him up, and I'm looking over there, and I could not see whatever it was that scared him and chased him back into my arms. He had been running and giggling, and all of a sudden he turned to screaming and crying.
Wow.
And then later my other son was born, and we would take turns feeding him at night when he'd wake up. So that way my wife could get a break and sleep too. So one time it was my turn to feed him, and I picked him up, went and warmed him up a bottle, and I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, and we had this huge vaulted ceiling, and we're sitting there and I'm feeding him, and all of a sudden his little head starts looking back and forth, back and forth. Something was flying back and forth there over us, and he stopped eating to look, and that freaked me out. My hair, I'm like, what is he looking at that I can't see? And whatever it is, it's going back and forth on top of us.
Yeah, what do I need to be looking at? Oh man.
So you're right in that. Yeah.
I hate to cut us short today, but I didn't realize that we've already been on here for a couple hours before we start recording and stuff. And my wife will be home in 30 minutes, and I still have to make a quick store run because I promised her I'd have stuff for the church picnic at the house before she got home today.
Yes, no problem, brother. That leaves us more stuff to tell next time.
Yes. And on that note, before we even hang up here, let me ask you, how about next week on like Thursday, about the same time? Would you be open?
Yes, sir. I'm available.
All right. I'll put you down for it then, and I'll call you back in 6 days.
Okay. Sounds good. Take care. God bless you.
Hey, God bless you, Pete. Thank you so much, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, later.